Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Development Committee, 11th of January 2018. So before we get started, should we be required to evacuate the building, would you please leave via the nearest available exit to the chamber. Our assembly point will be in the public car park at the side of the Civic Suite. Please do not delay your evacuation to collect any belongings. And please do not return into the building until given permission to do so by council staff. Please note that this meeting will be audio recorded, and if you have a mobile, please put it on silent. Thank you. Welcome to our visitors tonight. There will be, I'm sure, some bits of the meeting that you agree with, some bits that you don't agree with, but nevertheless, there isn't any part for public contribution to the meeting unless you've already registered to speak, as we have over here. So if you wouldn't mind respecting that as we go through, thank you. Item 1, apologies for absence. They've been received in the office from Councillor Steptoe, who's been substituted by Councillor Cutmore, Councillor Shaw, who's been substituted by Councillor Lucas Gill, Councillor Milne, who's been substituted by Councillor Sperring, from Councillor Stanley, and a substitution of Councillor Mrs Hoy by Councillor Mrs Mason. Are there any more? Thank you very much. Non-members attending. I note Councillor Mrs Hoy, Councillor Mr Hoy, Councillor Mr Mason and Councillor Mrs Lumley. Thank you. Item 4, minutes of the meeting held on the 14th of December 2017. Will you be happy for me to sign those as a correct and accurate record of that meeting? Yes. Councillor Hookway.
Yes, I do have an issue in relation to the minutes. At the last meeting of the Development Committee, there was a matter which was raised in relation to an application, and under advice from the chairman and also the planning officers, this was informed that was not formed part of the particular application. That information has since been found out to be incorrect, and a matter could have been dealt with at the committee for which a local community might lose out funding for a particular project on. I hope that this doesn't happen, but it would seem that there are situations whereby planning officers haven't been part of the whole process of a particular application where it's been passed from one person to another. And during the course of this, some information seems to be dismissed or lost and not been part of the report. What I would say is that perhaps that we should be not quite so dismissive of some members' questions because they might be relevant or to a particular application, and like in this particular incident. I therefore would like my comments related to the minutes, because I feel that I was not properly advised at that meeting, and something could have been made part of a particular application that we now hope that the developers will be liberal-minded with, shall we say.
Thank you. Noted your comments, Councillor Hookway, but clearly this what you raise about inappropriate advice and so on is significant. I think possibly this isn't the venue to discuss this out fully, as it will require some investigation. Could I ask?
I have raised this with the managing director today, so he's aware of the situation.
So this will need to be just further investigated. You're happy at this point? Your comment is noted, but it's not actioned until we've had further advice.
Yes, Chairman.
Thank you. You follow that, Alicia. So, right. Thank you. Right. Declarations of interest. Next, item number 5. I should start. Councillor Merrick first. We go round.
A non-pecuniary interest in item 8 I'm acquainted with the applicant's father through the Standards Committee, and I was also in the past acquainted with the applicant in a professional capacity.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Non-pecuniary interest for item number 7. I know both of the applicants personally.
Councillor Mrs Mason.
Thank you. Non-pecuniary interest in items 7 and 8. I know the applicants on item 7 and the applicant's father on item 8.
Would you just like to mention item 7, because I think we all know who the applicants are.
Yes, I think that's fine. Obviously, it relates to councillors who are present, but will, I believe, be disclosing their interests in due course when appropriate.
Okay. Councillor Mr Hoy.
Thank you, Chairman. A direct pecuniary interest in item 7, as we are the applicant. I know we don't have to, but we'll leave the meeting prior to the officer report, so there's not too much disruption, and come back afterwards.
Thank you. Councillor Mr Mason.
Well, clearly, Chairman, I have a non-pecuniary interest by knowing the applicants, Mr Hoy and Mrs Hoy. And of course I know who one of the people on the Standards Committee who's an independent member. I would have thought that was fairly obvious, but as other members have declared it, I suppose one has to follow suit, although I find it ridiculous to say.
Okay, thank you. More? Right, thank you. Right, our first item tonight is Timber Grove, London Road, Rayleigh. So, Mr Evans has got a presentation for us on this one. Oh, I should just mention before we get started, there is an amount of information regarding applications on the addendum. Can I just confirm that everyone has received the addendum? Right.
I'm sorry, Mr Chairman, I'm going to have to ask for time to read this.
That's,
8 pages in front of me, 9 pages, 11 pages that no one's thought to provide me with before the meeting.
members, I have to adjourn the meeting because we can't proceed with this item until Councillor Mason is fully aware of the contents of the addendum. So I'll take 5 minutes. Sorry.
Hopefully I can stay.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. I'm just going to take you through a few slides before I revert back to the Chair. So I've got a few slides and a few photographs to show you, and I'll probably take about 10 minutes to 15 minutes maximum. So we'll start off with the site area. The site area being the red-lined area. It's very difficult for me to point here, but this is the access, which is going to be the main access into the site, with the current access to the Timber Grove care facility being blocked up, and that will be a sort of a pedestrian access way. So in terms of site dimensions, the site is, as indicated in the report, is broadly 95 metres wide at its widest point, and it is 265 metres in length. The word grove does suggest to us exactly what the nature of the site is. It's predominantly, as members will see from that plan, towards the north aspect of the site. It consists of low quality woodland by now, which the report actually indicates, as does the amended arboricultural impact assessment. It recognises that although the site is subject to a blanket tree preservation order, many of the trees, due to biochemical defects, etc., have, and competing for light really, lots of them have low quality trees, hence what's made development a prospective outcome at this site really. But I'll go on to speak a little bit about the trees if required at some later point. So that's the site area. it's quite important for members, just to remind members then that, just bear with me, I'm just waiting for this to load up. Load up now. Sorry about this, members, I'm trying to get the next map to load up. Won't for some reason load up. Any suggestions? Right. Just bear with me, members. I'm trying to get the system to load up the next image, but there we go. Yeah, don't click it too often. So what members will see there, the purple area is the SCR1 area. Now, Timber Grove, I'm struggling to see this screen myself from here, I'm sorry. Timber Grove been in this area down here. So there's, just to indicate, as the report indicates, 71 of the dwellings will be delivered within the SCR1 allocation, with 12 dwellings provided outside the SCR allocation. Just have to be gentle with this machine, I'm afraid. Just wanted to show you the location plan. It's really awkward. Yeah, we'll try another slide. Just won't do anything, will it? Just bear with me. It's not as if it's thinking about it at the moment, is it? This is... It's really bad, isn't it? Layout, site layout plan. I'm sorry about this, members. That's all I can do about this. There we go. That's the location plan. Right, if you see me shaking on this pen, you know why, don't you? So, obviously, the red site area marks out the extent of the planning application site. Members will notice this sort of dog leg that goes out to a westerly direction. Right, that's why, I guess. Right. So again, that dog leg is shown on this plan as well. Right, hopefully that will stay on the screen. Right, so the members can see there the extent of the layout of the site, which is quite important. Now, this plan, I'll explain to members what this plan is. That's, as explained to a third party, an applicant is not required to show or indicate on a planning submission the site that adjoins the planning application site. So Rochford Council has produced this plan the last couple of days just to demonstrate to members. We have the application site itself then, and what we've done is we've superimposed Claremont Avenue, I believe it is, isn't it? Claremont Crescent, sorry. So we've, for the purposes of members being able to address a particular point, which is that of, within the report, on page 6.99 of the report, there's a section there in 24.10 upon the impact upon the amenity of neighbouring properties, which is an issue that we'll come to before I conclude my report. So this plan has been produced specifically for that purpose, and what this plan seeks to show is, specifically, is the location. I'm struggling to see myself here, I'm sorry, members, that this is plot 16, and this here is plot 14 and 15, and these are the units, 4-bedroomed properties in which the assisted living units, replacing the Timber Grove care facility, the move away from the traditional, perhaps institutionalised type of care. This is where these units are going to be located. That's the purpose of that slide, just to show you. So what members will see from this layout is, what is quite important to show is that it's arranged in block form then, the development, obviously access via these roads. The idea behind this application is, what we have here is an outline planning consent for the 500 Countryside site here, which is an outline consent. What we have along the frontage here is the 49 dwellings at Grange Villa, which have been approved, leaving a balance within the SCR1 allocation of 1. So it's important that I think on the outline consent, there's mention and provisions to be made for sort of integration in with other phase developments within the total SCR1 allocation. That's the idea. So you'll see arranged in block forms, and I'll show some street views in a while. But the important thing to show here is, members will note from the report, there's an 8-metre wide buffer strip here, which coincides with this area at the top of the site, which is, there's a part of it in this area, which is flood zone 2, and then there's an area which is flood zone 3. So the 8-metre buffer strip serves 3 purposes fundamentally, which is 1, which is to retain a level of amenity that currently exists on the site in terms of tree coverage. It helps to slow down water runoff points in terms of the Rorith Brook here, and also there's a badger set here. Within the report, there's a badger set to the northwest aspect of the site, where a 10-metre buffer strip has to remain between any development and the badger set. So it serves 3 purposes. We'll move on to the next slide, and I'll just... Let's have a look. Right, okay. Right, what we'll do is we'll have to skip a few of these, but site layout plan relative to... Yes, we've shown that. Analysis plan. This plan is quite useful if it comes up. Now we'll go on to... It's just potluck, this, isn't it? Don't know what's wrong with it. See nothing like it really. Housing accommodation schedule. Right, okay. Just doesn't seem to want to open anything. I'm sorry, members. Right, it's open. That's a housing. That's an allocation housing schedule, accommodation schedule. I think there's a number of properties ranging from 2-bedroomed, 2-storey units, 2.5 stories, flats over garages. So there's a range, it's just have a mind of its own, this has a range of properties types. What this is this is quite important, members, in accordance with H4 of the development plan. This plan actually shows the location of the affordable housing element within the scheme. So it is sort of stringed out to within the development. The properties here, they are the 3-storey properties. These are with hipped roofs. So, and then basically what we have here is the green space. So just to show that it's not, the affordable housing are not just sort of hemmed into one particular corner of the site, made up of a range of house types and mixes really. So it won't be obvious where the affordable housing is within the development. Right, let's see if we can progress. Right, what I might do now is show you some street scenes. Because obviously it's quite painful for myself and members waiting for this machine to load up. So I think it's quite important that I show you some street scenes really, rather than just block plans. It'll mean more to us, I think, if we can try and get these up. It's just, there we go. Yeah, I know what you mean. So what we have here is plots 14 to 16. So I mentioned we'll start off with those because it's quite pertinent that we do. Plots 14 to 16 are the assisted living units, i.e. the Timber Grove aspect of the development. And I'd just like to point out really, so the development in its entirety ranges in built form heights. Now what I'd like to demonstrate to you is that these properties here are the supported living, and these were on the boundary. Remember the plan I showed you for the purposes of appreciating where the site was in relation to Claremont Crescent? So just to outline to you the massing of this built form here, because that is a pertinent issue that's obviously has been raised. Now, the height of the building, and these are all reciprocal buildings, the same in terms of design. So there's two that face north on the plan, and there's one that faces south, so arranged within a crescent, basically. Now, the height of these buildings are 6.4 metres in height to the highest part of the roof, and 2.4 metres to eaves level. So they've been purposely designed, because they are quite close to the site boundary with Claremont Crescent. They're within about 3 metres of the site boundary on its eastern side. The eaves levels have been reduced to 2.4 metres with a hipped roof. Now, you'll see from the addendum that there's concern regarding impact upon the amenity, and I've covered that in 6.99. So just to qualify that point, the actual side elevation, let's have a thing now. Yes, the side elevation. So this elevation here is the elevation that will face the actual highway. So this elevation will be the elevation that faces east. So there's actually no window in that elevation in any case. But I just wanted to point that out. We'll go on to some street scenes, and I think I'll return back to the chair and conclude, really. Because let's have a look. Street scene 27. Yeah. There's nothing open, is there? I don't think.
You'll open while you speak, if you can.
Yeah, let's have a look. I can't really speak without having the slides, really, to be honest. Yeah, so in terms of the design and form, what I would say is that from the original plan, members will note that the design has been amended a number of times. The last design was subject of reconsultation at some point late November, and those designs were worked up in consultation with Essex Place Services Urban Design Team. So the main focus of that sort of design review was to look at getting green edges along the highway network, to get like a boulevard type arrangement where there was opportunities for planting trees along the roadway, to get keystone corner buildings, and that's demonstrated in some of the street views, where on corner buildings you have a building that actually interacts with both on the corner of a street, so it's sort of a semi-curved building. Looked at the materials, looked at whether the parking on that area of land which will be blocked up, that was parking for the timber grove facility previously, that's now like a boulevard, walkway, pedestrian link. So those are the changes that have been made. We did also consider the lawfulness of accepting changes which are in accordance with the development management procedure. So that is the legal side of that is covered. So what members will see here, this is a typical cross section. So we're going from sort of, it's a long section, so we're looking at all the different ranges of houses along the street scene, just to give members a feel for what it would actually feel like. So there are no close board fencing within this development. It's, there'd be railings, a lot of brickwork, some low walls, so reducing any physical infrastructure that will give someone the impression that they're hemmed in as they go along the estate road. That is something that the design should avoid. And members will note that the National Planning Policy Framework places great importance on achieving high levels of design, because ultimately these are places where people are going to live and need a high quality life. Right. You're getting better luck on this than me, Mike. I can't seem to get it to open anything. In terms of perhaps, as this machine decided what it's going to do, in terms of looking at currently, what I was trying to show you these slides is currently then the road that serves the Really Sports and Social Club. Basically, that will be the main access into the site. Now, in terms of the trees themselves, most of them, as indicated in the arboricultural impact assessment, will be removed over a phased period. It's not doing anything, is it? So, in terms of the key issues, right, that's another street scene, perhaps, I'm not sure. Obviously, I'm going to get no joy with this, so I'm going to sort of just maybe sum up what the key issues are. There was lots of photographs to show you in terms of the boundary of the site, which showed a lot of trees around the boundary. So in terms of the development itself, most of the trees will be removed. They're subject to a blanket tree preservation order. Where some trees are considered of amenity value, they will be retained. The lesser important trees, which are struggling in terms of their health anyway, will be removed over a period, obviously, to make way for the development. But the idea is, if members will note, that buffer strip at the north boundary and the northwest boundary, that will be retained, which is part of retaining amenity, providing for the badger set, and also reducing runoff from the site. So, in terms of, I'm sorry that I'm not able to show you probably, there's 50 slides on here, members, but I'm obviously unable to show you them due to the problems. So I'm going to have to sort of wrap up really. But the key issue is that the housing, in terms of policy, then where we stand on this, in terms of housing, members will note from the report, in terms of the SCR1 allocation, there's a case that Rochford Council has a duty to maintain a 5-year land supply. So although it's gone over the allocation, it's considered to be, given the development that it is, it'll deliver affordable housing. It's not considered to be in conflict with the council's development plan. I would go as far as to say that the design now is exemplar. It's a very good design in terms of the spacing and layout of the development. Sufficient walkways, green edges along walkways, opportunities for tree planting. So it's a very good scheme in that effect. There are 45 conditions, I think, attached to this consent. So in terms of the safeguards, in terms of landscaping, protecting those trees which are to remain, those conditions will achieve that. The issue in terms of the sustainable drainage system, as outlined by the development plan policy DM28, that's achieved. I think one of the key issues here is that it's worthy to note that many people within the consultation period made comments on the highways issue, in terms of, so I've acknowledged the fact that at key times when I've been in the area, the road is very busy, there is congestion, etc. However, yeah. So in terms of the highways issue, I have been to the site on probably 5 or 6 different occasions during the day, and I've experienced as a driver what the site is like in terms of the site frontage at busy times of the day. Now, obviously, we sought a view from Essex Highways on this matter, and they haven't actually indicated a specific requirement for any sort of highway provisions that they recognise that that the development will cause a further issue. So that's covered. There are conditions within the consent that's in line with the highways. I'm aware that members may want to discuss the issue of crossing, pedestrian crossing, safe access, linkage to other facilities, etc. So in terms of the flooding then, the flooding is deemed acceptable. Because it's in an allocated site, the requirements of a sequential test do not apply, although it's in flood zone 2 and 3. And the exception test applies in zone 3, I think, but it does meet with the exceptions test. So as a matter of policy, therefore, members, I consider now, the application having been in with Rochford Council for quite some time, the scheme in terms of site area is the same, but the actual development, the layout of the development has changed significantly, with the idea that the council and the developer achieves between them a good quality design that will serve the community in the future. So on that note, and I apologise for the slides, it's quite frustrating having prepared them, I'll return to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a speaker, Mr. Clark, on this one. If you'd like to come up, just turn the microphone on, please. Some of the slides are preloaded for the next ones. 5 minutes, I'll let you know when you've got a minute to go.
That's great. It should be about 3 minutes. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Scott Clark. Rochford Planning told me not to come here to put on the heartstrings of the Planning Committee and to present technical facts. I'm naturally going to ignore that advice. One of the things I've always believed throughout my career as a manager is people work for people, and in turn, people work with people. In fact, in this instance, people are important, and so is freedom of speech. I do not need to be technical. I'm not a solicitor. In fact, I'm merely a Rayleigh resident of over 30 years, husband of a Rayleigh school teacher, and father to 2 little girls, aged 3 and 5. When I bought my 5-bed house from Bellway Homes 2.5 years ago, I thought I'd won the lottery. In fact, I'd become mortgaged to the hilt, although we got the dream house in Rayleigh, the town we used to never want to leave. I'd gone through 2 house moves of renovating houses to get there. I was due a well-deserved rest in a new build. 6 months after that, arrived the first version of Timber Grove planning application with a care home sitting directly behind our house. And although the plan has changed many times, the plan you see today is still unacceptably has a care home that sits right on top of my 30-foot garden's fence. Timber Grove Marketing, a care home set in 2 acres of beautiful rural woodland, the first line on the marketing. A family of residents have been sold the dream. Can I propose a new strapline? Care home sitting on top of extremely unhappy neighbours with no outside space and no bins for rubbish collection. None are detailed on the plans, and I have raised this and had no response to it. I have compassion for the residents of the home, but I believe it is kept secluded for a reason. Think back to the Timber Grove, the first line of its marketing. Why not take the plans away today and nestle the home at the back of the development and give the residents of the home the space and privacy they deserve? Indeed, Fitzroy is a business, not a charity, and is driven by profit, not well-being. I also want you to consider this. You are considering a 24-hour business being located right next to my house and neighbouring houses. Staff work covering 24 hours of the day. Constant noise of staff driving to and from the site, car park, which is an awful design, by the way. Taking rubbish to the hidden bin site 24 hours a day, more noise. Ambulances to and from the home, more noise. Deliveries to the home, more noise. Not to mention noise from the residents themselves. Not once have Fitzroy consulted me or my neighbours on what we think of the plans. Again, people work with people. They are working against potential neighbours already. Final thought, before I added bits on, this is my original speech. Review the Essex Design Guide and see it's not been followed. Ask for a site plan that shows neighbouring properties, which has suddenly appeared last night, and make the right decision and reject this scandalous proposal for the people of this great town. I recommend that due to last night's release of a site plan of neighbouring properties, the decision tonight should now be delayed to allow comments to be submitted on it. I've been asking for this. In fact, I will read out. I've been told I'm not allowed to hand this out tonight. Yesterday, 10th of January, a plan was finally produced that showed surrounding properties in Claremont Crescent. It has taken 482 days of complaining for the planning department to get this produced. Why now? The red box on there is my house. Why is that there? The late document needs further time for people to view. Less than 24 hours before the committee is unacceptable. Therefore, I propose a delay. Last night, it appeared on the council website showing my property highlighted in red. I'm not sure why. I have been highlighted in red, and this document has been made public.
1 minute to go.
Thank you. This morning, 11th of January, the document has now moved location on the website. I appreciate the website is quite restricted and the documents are shown you'll be familiar with. The planning department have taken it off for a reason. Are they trying to hide it? I don't know, or to show. But I've got phone shots from my mobile phone that state it was on there, stating the 10th of January, that's when it was added. How can that be acceptable? On the subject of trees, it's an interesting one. And I want to add this point, and I haven't got any speech written for this. That patch of land there behind my house is the only trees between where my house is and London Road. Obviously, lots of new houses proposed for that site. So why do we want to take away, with air pollution now being stated as a public health emergency, or it's about to be stated as that, why do we want to take away the only trees in that area between my house and the A130? And that's me. Okay, thank you
Very much.
Thank you for your time.
Do we have any non-members who'd like to speak on this one? Councillor Mrs Lumley.
Thank you, Chairman. I wasn't aware that I would be called to speak first.
Yeah, non-members first, and then
Thank you.
the members will have their discussion.
I am now
You
aware
just
of
get
that.
the one go.
Thank you. I understand our residents' concerns over the traffic congestion and pedestrian safety in London Road. I've lived on London Road for 46 years and experienced these issues almost every day, with traffic at, excuse me, at a standstill at peak times in the morning and afternoon and through to the evening. Traffic has difficulty turning right from Little Wheatley Chase into London Road. Traffic queuing to turn right into the BP garage blocks the main road. There are already too many junctions in close proximity to this site on a very busy stretch of road, and there will be more. The narrow footways are inadequate for pedestrians to pass someone with a pushchair or mobility scooter without stepping into the busy narrow road. In this heavily populated area, west of Hatfield Road Junction with Victoria Avenue, up to the Carpenter's Arms roundabout, there is no safe place for pedestrians to cross the London Road to access schools and services. Over recent years, the effects of cumulative developments, inadequate footways, and lack of safe crossing points, together with increased traffic flow, have neither been recognised nor addressed by Highways. I'm astounded to read in the report, on page 673, para 22.170, that no highway deficiency exists. All incidents that have occurred between 2010 and 2016 are all down to driver error. So that's okay then? I don't think so. Highway safety for pedestrians and drivers is a real concern. I would just like to assure residents that the two Essex County Councillors responsible for Rayleigh are actively pursuing the provision of a pedestrian crossing in this vicinity, and we have a meeting scheduled with Highways very shortly. I just have one other comment to make personally, and that is around the secondary school place deficit of 344 places by 2020 to 2026. That's just around the corner. How are these places going to be provided and where? Thank you.
Councillor Mr High.
Thank you, Chair. It's only a brief comment. It was interesting to note that I think Mr Evans said he'll come back to the horticulturalist report or the trees. I'm not sure you did in full, and it might be a fault of the slide. I think there are some issues around this application, and I think they have probably shown up by the number of conditions. I was reminded by Councillor Mason next to me of his saying, and also the late Councillor Black, who I've heard say this before, 45 conditions may well suggest there is a problem with the application. There's an awful lot of conditions relating to the horticulturalist's report, I'm impressed I can say that at the moment, and around lots of issues around that area, and also around the surface water drainage.
Conditions. It's different this time.
I think it's a concern that the application is here at this stage with those still outstanding and with them being put forward as conditions in such a volume.
Thank you. Just before we go forward into the members' proper discussion, you are quite right, Councillor Hoy. We have got a difference in the way that the recommendations are presented specifically for this. And we did talk about that at call over. I wonder if Mr Evans might just cover the reason why we've got the full explanation and the greater amount here. Please.
Okay, to cover that point, where I've previously worked, there'd be 50, 60, 70 conditions on a planning consent, so it's quite unusual for heads of terms of conditions to be included. This is for the purposes of a clarity for members to see exactly in terms of the conditions that would be required in any event to achieve the quality outcomes that come with part and parcel of a development. So I would respectfully respond by saying the fact that there might be 45 conditions on a consent reflects actually the complexity of the application rather than any difficulty with it. That's, having dealt with majors for a long time, it's not unusual to have that number of conditions whereby it is possible to show, for example, certain features on a plan. Then government advice does indicate that where possible, conditions should be at a minimum in order to reduce the need for pre-commencement conditions, etc. But my response would be that, for example, the sustainable drainage conditions or the conditions on the trees, and coming back to the trees, what the arboricultural impact assessment indicates is that there's been discussion over probably a two-year period with the Rochford District Council's arboricultural officer, and basically in terms of the conditions are there to make sure that the outcomes that are outlined in the arboricultural impact assessment are actually achieved. So the main things we're talking about there is when a tree's to be removed, etc., when are protection barriers to be put around the trees that are to remain there for quite some time, and then over time, as the new planting emerges, they will be replaced. So the fact that many conditions on a consent doesn't actually indicate that there's a fundamental problem with it. My view as an officer would be, if there was a fundamental problem with this application, then the recommendation this evening would be that the application be refused. However, government advice, by the same token, does suggest that where an application can go forward and where safeguards are required by planning condition, government advice is that it should go forward with planning conditions, regardless of whether it's 10 or 50 conditions. Thank you.
Thank you. If I just follow up, so what essentially we've got here is, on previous occasions we've had heads of conditions which have described that tree protection, as an example, might be in place. In this application, we've got the details of what those protection measures would be, which is one of the principal reasons why there's so much there, which I suppose is officers having done work up front rather than after the application has received its permission or not, as the case may be. Councillor Mason. Mr. Mason.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to ask a question, if I may. We've had the benefit of training on SUDS, which is basically surface water drainage. And because we've had the benefit of that, I'm sure all members understand the report better. But nevertheless, it's a decision of the Flood Authority. One of the things that I don't understand, and it's a question, is if we have an FRA for this site, but we know there are other sites that are going to be very close to it, if not adjacent, if not adjoining, then why don't we have presumptive potential flow rates interpolated into this FRA? Because very simply, we could agree to this application based upon the flow rates that are given, and then find that there's a further development nearby with an increased flow into that watercourse, which causes it to flood. So what we've actually done is agreed to something without thinking about the consequences of flow from somewhere else. So my question is, where in the application has that been taken into account of by the applicant and by the council and by the Flood Authority?
if we can deal with that one before we get on to the members' discussions, can we?
Within this ill-fated presentation, members, I do have the copy of the FRA and the hydraulic modelling analysis, which actually answers your questions. So if I can bring it up on the system, just bear with me for a moment, and I'll have a look if I can find it. But an answer in terms of the hydraulic modelling analysis has taken into account flow rates. So I can't be categoric and say that it's taken into account the flow rates that are coming from other sites. I can't categorically answer that. But in terms of the modelling that's been prepared on the basis of the response from Essex SUDS itself, they don't see a problem as long as they comply with the conditions that they've set, which are standard conditions.
Chairman, the answer I've received is I can't assure you about Councillor Mason, Mr Mason, was that me? So I see that as a major flaw. I also see major flaws in exactly the same fashion as there are with traffic flows. We only ever look at transport assessments in relation to one site, never at the other sites that adjoin them or actually are adjacent or flow to them. That's a huge error, it's a huge flaw. I foresee huge difficulties for residents of Railay.
Strengths.
Chairman, this is...
Where's Mike? Where's Mike?
Sorry. I don't know if I can help, but I'm not privy to the finer details of the flood risk assessment, not having read it. But I'd just like to highlight to members, and the concern being about the joint flow rates. When a flood risk assessment is done on a site, the developer has to calculate the flow from whatever that site is. And what the SUDS team and the Environment Agency require is that the discharge rate from the development that's before you is either the same or preferably better than that rate. So we've had debates in this chamber about greenfield runoff rates, and there may be tables and it's tabulated and disputes over the figures, but we get to a point, let's say for instance, just for the purposes of this discussion now, that the flow rate is considered as the site is now, without the development, let's pretend 8 litres a second, just for argument's sake. What the developer has to go away with that figure and then do a scheme and drainage analysis and everything else, tanking, holding back, swales, so that the scheme that will come before you either achieves the same 8 litres per second or preferably say 7.5. So there's improved capacity in the drainage network. Now as a broad concept, that's what these developers are aiming to achieve under the supervision of the SUDS team and the Environment Agency. So to some extent it doesn't matter if there's 3 or 4 sites all adjoining, because if they're all following the flood risk assessment rules, they're all trying to calculate what the runoff is to start with and then bettering that through their development. I don't know if that helps, Chairman.
Right, members, we'll now open the discussion up to you. Councillor Mountain, thank you for being so patient.
Thank you, Chairman. 114 pages. That was quite a weighty read, including and plus the addendum at the end. The first point I want to make, there is a correction to the report on the addendum because the report was initially labelled as being in Swain Park Ward. So I accept that that has been corrected. However, there has a knock-on effect to this. The knock-on effect is on page 6.26 in relation to point 21.47. It states that there was no response recorded from ward members. Which ward members were consulted? Swain Park, which no longer exists, Swain Park and Grange, I wasn't consulted, or Downhall and Raworth Ward. I happen to have direct experience from previous involvement and engagement back in 2012 alongside my fellow ward member at the time, Councillor Joan Mockford. She and I attended pre-submission meetings to discuss the plans. And I find it strange that there was no response recorded from ward members. I'm concerned that ward members weren't actually invited to be involved, largely because the ward that was listed no longer exists. This also has a knock-on effect to page 6.41.21.101, where the Essex County Council Economic Growth and Development
incorrectly make reference to the site being located in Swain Park Ward as well. So it's not just the actual front page of the report that needed amending. Point 2154, Essex Wildlife Trust. They state that they're unable to comment fully due to difficulties in accessing the relevant planning documents on your consultation portal. I'm a bit concerned about that, not least because I think that their involvement would have been very welcome, specifically in relation to the badgers, as identified in relation to environmental impact. So slightly concerned that there were issues with Essex Wildlife Trust. They were unable to access our planning documents. No response from the NHS. Maybe it's not necessary, just out of interest. I think it would be quite beneficial perhaps to hear from the NHS in relation to care home provision and our provisions for elderly residents and residents in care homes. Maybe it's not needed, it's just something that I've flagged up in the 114 pages. Page 6.47, 22.9, the application site is within the general location of north of the London Road, policy H2, SER1 to accommodate 550 dwellings. This is, 550 dwellings within SER1, part of the core strategy. Outline planning permission has already been granted for 500 dwellings through the countryside. We've had 47 dwellings through Grange Villas. So in total, if this site is agreed, SER1, including these 83 dwellings, it will take up to 630 residential planning units within the SER1 site allocation. Not even going to mention the Eon site because I accept that was a windfall. However, the point is that West Rayleigh is not to be treated as an area where we can just have development in a hodgepodge, piecemeal, dog-legged fashion without any consideration to how it affects the residents, how it affects people that travel and live in Rayleigh, and how it affects the look of our district. And what does it state about our core strategy? We should have the confidence and strength as a council to acknowledge that we identified SER1 for 550 dwellings, not 630 residential planning units. 6.92.22.279. The Environmental Agency have previously advised that the site is currently shown to fall within flood zone 3A, the high probability flood zone, and is classified as a more vulnerable development. 0.22.281. Ideally, no development would be provided within flood zone 3A. This is under flood risk mitigation. I've heard Mr. Evans explain the conditions and understand there are lots of conditions. I also reflect back on member training that we had with Sean Scrutton. It's clearly stated that we should be very sceptical of plans that have several conditions, a number of, this amount of conditions. Now, it's not necessarily the number of conditions that I want to flag up, it's actually what those conditions are. And I note that on two previous occasions, affordable housing was put forward as grounds for refusal. It's now coming under a condition. Affordable housing is mentioned in a condition. And it just got me thinking that possibly we should be really, really examining these conditions and looking through the 114 pages of this report and wondering whether some of these conditions aren't actually, well, they can't be turned round and presented as reasons for refusal, grounds for refusal. For example, there is a lack of surface water drainage strategy and maintenance plan. There is a lack of any scheme to minimise the risk of off-site flooding caused by surface water runoff and groundwater during construction works and to prevent pollution. There is a lack of clarity regarding bin storage collection points in relation to the apartment blocks. There is a lack of provision of a full landscape master plan, including provisions of play space. There is a lack of a full arboricultural survey and report, including a scheme of supervision for the arboricultural protection measures. Lack of material specification and appropriate samples, providing information relating to materials, detailing and to fixtures and fittings. A lack of submission of a lighting scheme. Lack of provisions for well-designed on-street parking in certain areas, and concerns relating to disturbance of badgers. I would suggest that as this site keeps coming back, and has been since 2012 was the first time Timber Grove was mentioned to me on the development meeting in development committee. Why hasn't the developer got this right now? Why are these conditions? Surely these should be recommendations to the developer that if you want to get something approved, if you want this to go forward, this is what we as a council and as a committee expect. We need to set high standards, and I have said my say, and I'm very interested to see what other members have to say. I may come back later if that's possible. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Newport.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll be brief. I've looked through the report, and page 6.42, the developer should ensure safe walking and cycling routes to schools. I don't consider there to be any cycling routes in that vicinity, and I'll be interested to know what the proposals are for that. As Councillor Mountain's already mentioned, SCR1, 550 houses, and this report sells us on the idea of approving this because these houses will be built in a timely fashion. Has the developer committed to a timescale to build this site out? The other point that I'd like to bring up, as Councillor Lumley has mentioned, is about the crossing. It recommends in the report 6.95 to 2.29 about the provision of a crossing that could be sought via a legal obligation or a condition, and that's something that I would like to see, because that road is not safe. It's heavily congested, and it's heavily used by people, parents taking their children to Our Lady of Ransom School, and as you will know yourself, Chair, the London Road is a very, very busy road at school times. The other thing that's missing from the report that I didn't see was the details of the room sizes. Is that available? And the other thing that I would like to know, if possible, from the officer, the design of the SUDs, does that take into account the removal of the trees? Is that something that's factored in with the hydrology? Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs Mason.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I can only add to the level of concern that's been expressed. I think we've got head and hearts here. I've certainly attended a site visit some time ago now and have been involved in the previous applications. And we're aware of the drastic need for improved housing for the care home. However, we are not here for that reason. We're here as a planning development committee to assess this application on planning grounds. And I must admit my initial reaction on reading the report was disappointment. I was disappointed there was no site plan. I've seen it tonight. It would have been nice to have greater and longer to look at it. There is, as been mentioned, there's no information on room sizes. It just says the garden sizes are compliant, but normally we get a list of the plot numbers with the garden sizes so that we can check that we are comfortable, because there have been mistakes made in the past. Not many, admittedly, but they are made, and that's one of the reasons why members like to scrutinise detail as well as the general policies. The schedule, for example, which we've just seen up there tonight without binoculars, it should have been, in my view, included. However, that said, I have two major concerns in addition to the list of concerns that I've just heard. One of them is the design and access statement. On the design and access statement, there are lists of problems. No site of the Essex Police secure by design officers report. More space between a standalone unit and terrace of design and a terrace which would have been desirable. Concern really a garden shape, the fact that it has no utility value as a garden. Missed opportunity to make the arrival space, tri-arrival space next to plots 19 and 20. No information regarding the provision of play space. I mean, these are small items, but they should have been dealt with. More importantly, on 2121, I don't know the page number, but there's a list that the design and access statement would like put in the conditions. It's not there. We're talking about the number of 45 conditions, and yet something that's recommended by one of our consultees, unless you can correct me, and I have looked twice but I haven't found it, would appear not to be there. There's issues regarding accessing of parking spaces. I mean, this is fundamental. If you provide a parking space and it's considered that the car can't drive into that parking space, it has no value. So for those reasons, the design access statement, I am concerned. My other concern goes to the affordable housing. I think everyone will know I like affordable housing. We need it. Our residents need it. And 35% is absolutely fine. But 35% of what? 35% where? Our policy, I must admit, is unclear, but when we started, 35% was if we had 100 properties that were 3 bedrooms and 100 4 bedrooms, we would get 35% of each. Now it would appear the tendency seems to be that when an application comes up, we get 35%, which being the smallest 35%. Unfortunately, the detail's not in the report. It just says 2 houses for shared and 21, I think 29 units, 6 houses for shared ownership, 2 houses for affordable rent, and 21 flats. Now, I believe that's the majority of the flats are going to the affordable housing. I accept that we need flats, but we also need houses. So look at it another way, 35%, if you look at the size, of a 2-bedroom property, we should have 1. Or look at it another way. If you look at the number of bedrooms that are being provided across this site, taking it outside the care home, it's 199 bedrooms. Being kind, the amount of affordable bedrooms that we're providing for our residents in need are varied between 25 and 35. 25 and 35 is not 35%. And I don't know who decides this or how it's decided. Normally, it would be covered by the Housing Options Officer and the developer and planning in consultation, and we would have the detail. That detail is, again, sadly lacking, and I would suggest that we don't just want 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom properties. We also want 3, 4 and 5-bedroom. So that is a matter of concern. No explanation in the report, I'm afraid. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions. One is the road that's going out to the west of the site. In the officer's presentation, implied that there was going to be some connection with the other development. Is that the case? That's simple yes or no. My other question relates to sections 21.101 and 21.105. At 21.105, it stated that advice issued that if it was the recommendation of the local planning authority to refuse the planning application, the lack of childcare and education provision in the area would constitute a valid reason to refuse the application. So is that saying that that's a valid...
on the precise point in the report. But what you find, that the Education Authority have a misunderstanding of the appeal process. We've approached them on this a number of times. They put forward that there should be some kind of financial contribution, okay? And if they find that the application is refused for some other reasons, they want that financial contribution to be a reason for refusal, so they get drawn into the appeal process to defend to the inspector why they want the money. But if members haven't refused planning permission because of the lack of an education contribution, which can be secured by agreement and the applicant is agreeable, they don't get it, that it's not a reason for refusal. They put that caveat in so that they end up being consulted and involved in the appeal. But as soon as you got to the appeal, the inspector would turn around and say, what are you doing here? So we have tried to educate them on this, but unless the education contribution was deemed to be inadequate, let's say education was saying we need so many million for education or something, the developer's not willing to provide it, that's the only circumstances it would become a reason for refusal. They put that caveat in so that if for other reasons you refuse it, they want that reason in so they get automatically picked up and trawled and they don't lose the opportunity to trawl for the money. But if it became an appeal and the inspector was minded to grant approval, he would require the applicants to enter into a legal agreement to secure all these things that are set out in the report. Hopefully that helps.
Go on, carry on.
Yeah, and finally, it's really just an observation. It's 22.103. What I was surprised at, the language that was used by Essex Highways, which has said that there will be an imperceptible impact on the local highway network. I actually very rarely go down London Road, and I deliberately avoid it during rush hours. But for the last week or so, I've been looking on Google Maps and watching the build-up of traffic. And really, it's just to emphasise what others have said, that during peak times, both in the morning and in the evening, it's either red or amber, which shows heavy traffic delays there. And so I just think adding extra, just discount it, saying it's imperceptible. It's only imperceptible because you're joining gridlock traffic. And you're not going anywhere either.
Councillor Hawkway.
Thank you, Chairman. It's just one question, really. The main access road that leads into the site, is that also the main access road onto the neighbouring leisure facility, the football pitches and all that? And was there issues to do with parking in relation to usage to those facilities, and how will that affect the site?
Yeah.
Chairman, if it's not our turn. Members will recall one of the earlier iterations of the revised plan, that this area is currently used as car parking for the Rayleigh Sports and Social Club, and a separate standalone application was made to that displaced car parking to be provided over here. So that is now the subject of a separate application which is tied in by agreements to be achieved. So they have a facility in approval now to cover the lost car parking to that access if that was there. If while I'm in, Chairman, just the point, without stealing Mr Arwell's thunder, on the affordable housing question, the point members raised about why we're seeing a trend for more smaller units. In days gone by, I'll refer to it as the olden days, the housing management would love a 3-bedroom dwelling. They can rent it to a pensioner, a single person, people with families. It's universally adaptable. The problem is now that the people who would take that tenancy or rent that unit are penalised for having the larger units. So whilst it might be desirous to have 3 bedrooms and be perhaps, you know, a single person or just a couple, they can only take the 1 or 2 bedroom units that they need. So when these schemes are put forward, the developers, they go to our housing colleagues and they say, what's on your register, what's your demands and needs? And the housing officers tell them we have this many units in this ward and this many in that unit. And remember, the list is fairly fluid as well, because people not only park their request with Rochford for housing, but they're probably on Basildon's list, Southend, anywhere in the local area. So the numbers are somewhat grey. And by the time you come to a situation of giving a consent, some of those early assumptions in a pre-app stage have changed. But one of the common one is that the housing officers want smaller units because that's the demand that the people being housed are going for. Yes, in some cases we want perhaps, I don't know, 1 4-bedroom unit and however many 1 and 2 bedroom units because that's what the list is telling them. But that, in my view, is why you're seeing a reduced size of unit in the affordable provision, because the people needing housing are only being offered those smaller units because if they have spare bedrooms, that penalises them.
Councillor Sperring.
Thank you, Chairman. I think my colleagues have already raised a number of issues that I was going to raise. I can't quite comprehend how, after, as Councillor Mountain said, 4 years, we're still going down the road where we have so many questionable items. I have concern about so many of these issues as to who is going to be responsible to make sure all these conditions are implemented. There are so many of them and so in depth that I am genuinely concerned about that. And while this development is an issue, should we say, on its own, I have great concerns about the whole situation as raised by Councillor Lumley and Councillor Newport with regard to the infrastructure of the London Road. We're all familiar with it, and just to keep washing our hands of the situation, I think somewhere along the line we need to make sure before anything else starts developing on this project that county reassess the whole situation, because we know from our bitter experience in other areas they just keep saying there isn't an issue. There is an issue and we need to address it before we perpetuate the problem. Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah. Councillor Mrs Mason.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. As you could guess, I'd like to comment on the officer's comments regarding the 1-bedroom propensity there. Yes, I'm well aware that there is an excessive demand for smaller units. However, in this report, and I haven't found it, it just says, it doesn't say that there's been, oh, here we are, it doesn't say there's been, the housing office has been involved, it just says, oh, we want more properties. And it doesn't give us the details of the properties that are in affordable housing. So the information is not in the report. And it would appear from the report that the normal discussions between the housing options officers, the development planning and the developer has not taken place. I'm not saying it hasn't, and I'm not saying that information isn't available, but it is not clear here. There's a mention about a sanctuary housing. It says affordable housing would deliver 29 units, comprising 6 houses for shared ownership, 2 houses for affordable rent and 21 flats. But there's another area which I can't find, and I don't intend to flick through 114 pages, where it just says, the housing options officer says, oh yes, we want more property. Well, we know that. But if you're talking about smaller properties, then perhaps we should be looking at 35% of the bedrooms, not of the very small properties. So my point is, if you're providing in this planning application 199 bedrooms across a mix of properties, 35% of that would be 70. We're actually getting 25. No wonder we've got a very long housing list if that propensity continues. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to come back? Do you want to come back, Councillor Mountain?
Thank you, Chairman. I haven't had an answer to a single one of the points I raised, but I would like to know if any of the houses are in Greenbelt land. Any of the proposed? No, none. Okay. Well, having not had an answer to the points I raise, I'm going to move for refusal. I'm going to move for refusal on the lack of a surface water drainage strategy and maintenance plan, on the lack of any scheme to minimise the risk of
Just go a tiny bit slowly.
The lack of any scheme to minimise the risk of off-site flooding caused by surface water runoff and groundwater during construction works and to prevent pollution.
There was a point on that.
A lack of clarity regarding bin storage collection points in relation to the apartment blocks. a lack of provision of a full landscape master plan, including provisions of play space. I've done the bins. Lack of a full arboricultural survey and report, including a scheme of supervision for the arboricultural protection measures. A lack of material specification and appropriate samples, providing information relating to materials, detailing, and to fixtures and fittings. A lack of submission of a lighting scheme. A lack of provision for well-designed on-street parking in certain areas. Concerns relating to the disturbance of badger sets. A lack of design access statement, that was covered before. I would also like to, I feel I'd definitely support the points made by Councillor Sperry and Councillor Lumley, Councillor Newport. However, I am worried about adding anything to do with highways as a grounds for refusal, because in their infinite wisdom, or not, Essex County Highways do not raise an objection, and I would caution members, perhaps maybe we have enough grounds for refusal, but I think there is a lack of infrastructure. I think there are concerns with infrastructure, and if another member could phrase that, I would support that, but I'm reluctant to put anything forward at this stage.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Go on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The report says that there's 70 dwellings in SER1. So we've got a few more dwellings than that. Are they not in Greenbelt? When before this, the site was in Greenbelt, partly in Greenbelt. Is part of the site in Greenbelt, yes or no?
If I may, the site used to be, some of it used to be in the green belt. That changed when the bulk of the site was allocated into SER1. But the area at the bottom of the site where the care home stands is in a former allocation of community use in the old local plan. So not all of the site was fully within SER1. There was a proportion of it which was not in the green belt previously, and then the balance of the site was changed from green belt to SER1. That's why 10 or so of your units are not in the SER1 area. It spreads over the existing care home site and into what was previously green belt, if that makes it clear, Chairman.
That's very clear. I was remembering the previous application.
1 second. Right. Councillor Mountain, I think I counted 9 sort of general areas. Obviously, some of those officers will have some views on some of those and the strength of them or not, as the case may be. I think it's probably best if we just go through each one in turn, that you hear the officer viewpoint before you ask for a seconder, if that's okay. So if we can, I get an idea of how this is going, but if we're going to ask the officers in turn to do a job, we need to have the clarity. So, if we keep focus this, so we're on surface water runoff and issues around that. In the first instance, I've noted condition 17 in the report. Can we just take the officer view on surface water runoff, please?
Right. So that aspect has been partly answered by the officer here. In terms of the SUDS element, Mr. Stranks is right to say that any scheme needs to demonstrate that the water runoff from a site is no greater following the development as what it is currently. I have to say I'm very frustrated tonight. members by the fact that I'm unable to show you these slides, because at the end of the day, if you were able to see most of these slides, most of these questions would have been answered. So from my point of view, it's highly, highly frustrating. I've prepared for a significant time with these slides, and obviously it hasn't worked out. But we'll deal the questions. In terms of SUDS, that is the situation. I have checked actually on the system. You may have noted that I brought up the hydrological modelling report on this system, the header of it. Now, in terms of the documents that have been submitted, which I'll come on to, that hydrological modelling report, I can now actually verify, in terms of Councillor Mason's question, I've checked that report on here as the Chair was taking questions, that actually the modelling is across the whole flood zone, so it does take into account all of the adjacent sites, so it's across the actual flood zone area of the Rayleigh area. So in terms of that modelling, it is related to the SUDS aspect. So in terms of SUDS, what we have is an acknowledgement from Essex County SUDS that's given certain safeguards, which is normal practice in the event of assessing and delivering a development, that there will be conditions that actually tie the development in accordance with the modelling and the rationale that have been set out clearly in the modelling analysis. That's my first response to the first question.
Okay.
I've written down 14 questions, Chair, so I don't know whether you...
I just want to keep the clarity here. So, are you happy to continue with that one as a reason? Can you just...
Well, there is, it is clearly stated, there is a lack of strategy and maintenance plan as well.
So, I'm just making it clear. So, you're going to move... Can you just restate that element of your reason for refusal?
One of my grounds for refusal is a lack of surface water drainage strategy and maintenance plan.
Okay, thank you. So that's one in the bag. Second one I had was around bin storage. Can we deal with that one, please?
Yes. If I was able to show members the slide, the bin storage is shown on this plan, which is, and it's actually highlighted in the report as well. Now, it's a minuscule drawing, but the report says that the bin storage areas will be in the curtilage of each property. So they're highlighted in blue on this plan. So opposite every property, there's a bin storage, a typical green wheelie bin. There's not going to be any sort of commercial wheelie bin storages, even for the assisted living units. They're just small bin collection areas adjacent to each property. This is clearly shown on this plan.
So the officers are saying that the plans show that bin storage is demonstrated. How do you want to go with that one?
What the plan doesn't show is there's still a lack of clarity, not regarding bin storage, but collection points in terms of problems of access. So I'm still keeping lack of clarity regarding bin storage collection points in relation to the apartment blocks as a grounds to refusal.
Thank you.
Chairman.
Next one I'm going on to is landscape and play space, please. Do you want to make a comment on that one?
A landscape master plan has been submitted in support of the application. Now, what the plans clearly show, as I indicated at the outset, just bear with me, I need to find my pen, is you can see from the plan green areas at the top of the site, at the northeastern corner of the site. That's a green area, and specifically the design that's been worked up in accordance with Essex County Council Urban Design is to concentrate on getting green spaces, green edges by the sides of the highway, etc. So there's no allocated playground as such, but there are green amenity areas within the development, both in terms of at the top end of the site, and also there's that boulevard walkway, which is the current access to Timber Grove facility.
Okay, thank you. Can you restate and confirm on that?
Thank you, Chairman. Whenever I walk around the old Eon site, I smile as I look at the play space, because I first moved for that to be refused as a grounds because there wasn't a play space. So I think that there is, if we are looking at families moving into the area, I think there is a desire for a play space to be included with any plans. So I will stick to my grounds for refusal, lack of provision of a play space.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next one, I haven't written down this that well. The scheme of supervision around. Sorry, can you just help me there? It was.
Sorry, the next one was the lack of a full that one, arboricultural survey and report, including a scheme.
That's right. The arboricultural scheme of supervision, please.
Right. That is not materially the case. There has been a revised arboricultural impact assessment submitted in November, and this is an extract from it. It details very clearly the trees that are to be removed, details the phasing of the development, details trees to be crowned. It's a lot to read, but it is all there. So in terms of the actual requirements are set out in the AIA, as we call it, it is all there, and the conditions reflect that. The details of the tree removal scheme, given the fact there is a blanket tree preservation order, it recognises that some trees are to be retained. They are shown on a tree retention plan, which I can't show you because of the IT issues. So all that information is there, and that has been agreed with the council's arboricultural impact officer. So it is, the information is there for us to make a judgment on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, okay, that's fair enough. It wasn't in the report. I'm basing my reasoning on what is in the report. I accept what the officer has said, and I will remove that as a grounds for refusal. Thank you.
Next one, got around materials, fixtures and fittings within the properties.
The street elevation plans, the aim of those, if I were able to show you that all of them, was there's a mixture of brick, render, so that is a depiction of the actual materials. However, it's not unusual as sort of condition 2 or 3 to standardise the conditions in terms of reference to the plan. So there's 2 ways of safeguarding what the development in terms of materials are used. It isn't, I noted the comment the member made about details on materials. It would be standard to condition the plans in accordance with the submitted plans. The plans indicate the type of finish, but then there would be a condition on the submission of details of the material finishes, which isn't unusual as a condition. So the issue about the materials that are going to be used and the lack of clarity, there is clarity in the street elevations. However, I do accept that further clarity is required, but that clarity and certainty would be required and safeguarded via a condition.
Could you point out which condition that might be, if it is possible?
Well, condition 2 to begin with, that if the condition isn't there, then it can be added subject to members' approval, submission of samples prior to their first use.
Councillor Mountain on that one.
So if it's missing from the recommendation, what I've sought to do is to provide explicitly further views on what might be suitable. However, if it's missing, it can be added.
I've heard what the officers had to say. I'm happy for that to remain as a condition as opposed to grounds for refusal.
Right, so it would be a condition rather than a grounds for refusal, should we get round to that. Lighting I've got next. Lighting scheme, wasn't it?
That's correct. It is down as condition 7 and 8, but there is a lack of submission of a lighting scheme.
Okay.
In terms of that, I think at the end of the day, in terms of, I think that can be addressed by a condition. So prior to the first installation of any lighting scheme, it has to be submitted and approved in writing. I don't see a reason as to, in planning as to why it has to be submitted now. So I accept there is a lack of explicitness about that situation. However, it is standard that could be addressed by condition and resolved before the first installation of any lighting scheme.
Thank you, Chairman. I hear what the officer said. I think it goes back to the point that I raised and Councillor Sperring also followed up with, is the fact surely the developer should have got this right by now. This has been going on since 2012. But I accept that can be made a condition.
If we were talking about approval, that would be a condition on the
Yes.
previous one. Next one I've got is design of off-street parking, on-street parking.
Yes. In terms of the layout, this was a matter that was raised by Essex County Council Urban Design. So in terms of the layout that members see before them now, in terms of the roads have been designed in terms of the geometry to ensure that bin lorries can manoeuvre within the site. And also these sort of offshoots from the main, these offshoots, if I can see them, from the main access road. The design in its entirety now has taken into account the geometry and the turning areas that are required by bin wagons to actually manoeuvre and turn within the site. So members will note that I mentioned about the high quality design as part of the National Planning Policy Framework. Within that consideration, it's obviously we acknowledge it's not what the houses just look like, it's to do with everything, isn't it, in its entirety. And we acknowledge that in order to be adoptable in the long term, once it's completed, then it has to comply with parking standards and parking and turning areas for long vehicles as well.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll keep that as a grounds for refusal. Lack of provision for well-designed on-street parking in certain areas. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Badger sets next.
Yes. So in terms of, there we go. I would like to clarify that in terms of the documentation that has been indicated hasn't been submitted. The documentation is all there. There are various documents. This is the ecological impact assessment that was submitted. And basically, in a nutshell, what the assessment does is one of many things. It assesses what the impact of the construction period itself will have on badger sets. So badgers are protected under the Wildlife and Countryside Act 1981 and also by a separate Badgers Act. So in terms of the buffer zone for badgers, that is the reason for the 10-metre buffer area, because the badgers, what's happening apparently is that the badgers, there's about 10 sort of holes, entrance points to the set here, and they tend to be travelling out into the ploughed field here and across to the sports and social club area to have a roam around. So in terms of impact on badgers, this report is quite a weighty document that's actually taken into account the conservation status of badgers and what effect that the development would have. And it covers things from mitigation during construction period to safeguards, you know, once the development is actually assessed. And in terms of just clarifying the issue there in terms of the Essex Wildlife Trust, that difficulty in accessing the information, what we have is a sort of a non-objecting response from Natural England. So they've actually have got no issue with the development, and given their statutory obligation to comment on any impacts upon wildlife, then I have to conclude on the basis of this report and the recommendations made within this report that badgers will not be adversely affected during the course of developments or thereby afterwards. And I've taken the guide from this report and also Natural England's response to inform my report.
On that one,
Thank you, Chairman. Point 22.218, there will be an increase in the levels of noise and visual disturbance during the construction phase, which have the potential to result in disturbance to the retained badgers set. It's in the report, so I mean that slightly contradicts what the officer said. Is that correct? I mean, it clearly is going to disturb the badgers. The
acknowledgement is within this report that there will be disturbance, but it won't affect their their status. You know, the set, if the set was going to be removed and bulldozed away, but the set is going to have a fence around it during the course of development, it's not sort of indicating that the badgers will all remain. Perhaps they will get disturbed, but in its entirety, that set isn't actually not being interfered with in terms of of being bulldozed. And basically, on the basis of this report, there's obviously going to be some impact, but not an impact that's actually going to affect their favourable conservation status. And that is actually the response that's aligned with Natural England's response.
Okay. Do you want to take a position on that item then? In or out?
I am going to keep that in.
Okay, thank you. And the last one on my list is design and access statement, around the design and access statement.
Yep. My response to that is that the design and access statement obviously is talking through the application. I wasn't quite sure of the point that Councillor Mason was making there in terms. It all depends also which design and access statement has been submitted. There's been an amended design and access statement that was submitted as the last complete set of amended plans that was submitted in November. But I'm not sure, what was the actual point that Councillor Mason was
I
making?
have to
Sorry,
Chair. Councillor Mountain on this, who's putting forward.
Chairman, if there was an updated report in November, I think we have sufficient grounds for refusal as they are. I will remove that. Thank you.
Right. Are you content that we've gone through your items?
Thoroughly.
Right, okay. At this moment in time, members, we have 5 reasons for refusal that have been put forward by Councillor Mountain around surface water runoff, bin collection, play space, the quality of provision of off-street parking and the badger set. Is anyone willing to second that? Councillor Newport. Right, members. We have a motion for refusal on 5 points that have been clearly explored and discussed. I think it would be wrong to bring anything new, and everyone's had the opportunity to discuss prior to that. So I will ask for a vote now. So those members in favour of the refusal, based on the 5 points that we put forward and discussed and had the clarity over, please indicate. Okay, those against? That item is refused. Thank you for your perseverance on that one, members. Yes, Councillor Cutmore.
I was very interested in that debate and following it thoroughly. One thing that comes to light is the fact that there are certain items that have been raised by the local ward members that don't seem to have been discussed or collaborated with by officers, and I have concerns about that. I think the whole idea of this is that officers should work with ward members as to how they complete the designs, and indeed the ward members are saying they weren't even in consideration in some of the items there. So
Okay.
I'd like to get some clarification on that, Chairman.
I think...
just if I can just finish what I'm saying.
Well,
you,
I think...
just to say that
if you
I
don't
think...
mind, Councillor Cutmore, I think the way in which the planning committee works is not for... the development committee is not for the development committee to discuss. We simply need to take the applications that are presented for us and come up with a decision as we're doing.
But it's a means to an end, Chairman, and the end isn't the right one. And that's the problem.
It is, but your point is noted, and that will be taken to the appropriate venue, and I think you're probably in the best position to determine what that venue would be. Right, our next item, item 7, 3 Abbey Close, Holme Bridge. Councillor Mr and Mrs Hoy have left the room. Would anyone like to say anything on this? This would obviously wouldn't normally come before us.
I will, Chairman. I'm hopeful that the plans will kick in a moment. This is on the to a semi-detached house on the western side of Abbey Close, 15 metres north of the junction with Abbey Road. We can see the proposed plan there, and I'll only, because of our problems with IT tonight, I'll only dwell on the existing plan. The application is for a part 2-storey, part single-storey side extension. You'll see from the floor plan that it extends out to attach onto an existing ground floor rear extension. And as the Chairman said, it's brought, usually delegated type application, but brought tonight before members because the applicants are members of this council. The extension width is 2.5 metres overall, but reduces down by a metre as your guidance requires for a suitable side isolation space at upper floor level. And you'll see that it is roofed over so that we sort of reduce the amount of flat area concerns. It'll be finished in matching materials to match with the existing house. You'll also see the designer has taken in a subservient form by putting just a slight drop of 0.15 metres at the ridgeline, just to make it look like an addition as opposed to a over-enlargement of the dwelling itself. The layout would retain 2 car parking spaces in the front garden area in accordance with your standards. There is an issue that's not too material, but to point it out to members just to be thorough, that the rear elevation, you'll see there's an extra window at the back here. Because it's in the same plane as the existing windows and therefore overlooks the garden the neighbouring gardens the same as the existing windows, just albeit a bit closer. Although there will be that slight increase, and that's what it is, a slight increase of overlooking, it's not material, it wouldn't amount to a reasonable reason for turning the application down. And similarly, you'll see at first floor level there are 2 side windows, one to a bedroom and one to a walk-in wardrobe. They face a solid brick wall. There is no windows to number 1 alongside that would be in close proximity and overlooked. So the recommendation, Chairman, as you'll see in the report, is for approval subject to the conditions in the officer report.
Right, members, move the recommendation for approval from the Chair. As members in favour of the approval, please indicate. That's unanimous. Thank you. Item 8, 4 Cagefield Cottages, Stanbridge Road, Stanbridge. Again, this is one that wouldn't normally come before us. Who's presenting on this one? Mr Stranks is doing this one again.
I am, Chairman. We just lost the plans temporarily. Bear with us. This app. Chairman, this application is to a semi-detached house located on the eastern side of Stanbridge Road, 35 metres south of the junction made with Cage Road, in the village of Stanbridge, which is residentially allocated, although it's surrounded by the green belt. The proposal is for a small front extension, when we see it in a moment, to the porch and the bathroom attached on the side. And this item is brought before you because the applicant is closely related to an independent member of the Council Standards Committee. The proposed extension would project forward of the original wall by 1.5 metres and would have an overall width of 4.1 metres. We can see it now on here. This is the small projection on the front. You'll notice the existing bathroom on the side, and members will note, hopefully they can see, that the roofing that goes over the front will again come over the back of the existing addition on the side to which it attaches. It extends the bathroom, extends the porch. Will roof over, so there's no sort of less unsightly flat roof forms. There's no windows, as you'll see, giving rise to overlooking, and it's finished, or would be finished, in matching materials. It would retain 2 car parking spaces in the front garden area, which aren't compromised by this, and therefore it's recommended for approval. Just one point before members decide: there is a listed building some distance over here, the former old post office. It's deemed, as you'll see in the report, that the distance between that and the proposal would not be detrimental to the setting of that listed building. So, as I said earlier, Chairman, the recommendation is approval subject to the conditions in the report.
One's indicating there's recommendation, members, printed on page 8.3. Move the recommendation. Those members in favour of the approval, please indicate. Thank you. That's unanimous. That's approved. Item 9, which is a referred application from the weekly list. Halcyon Park, Pools Lane, Holmbridge. Additional access to Surf Holiday Park into Kingsman Farm Road. Mr. Stranks is taking this one, I believe.
Chairman, whilst we wait for that one to warm up, this is to a site at the far end of Pools Lane, where it joins with Kingsman's Farm Road. The site, as you'll hopefully see in a moment, is to a holiday and residential caravan park. Pools Lane runs into the site here. The existing entrance comes into a central point with a little roundabout and site office. And in this part of the site is the predominantly residential uses which are on the higher ground of the site. The remaining balance of the site generally is laid out or will be laid out for holiday caravan type uses. Now the application before you is for a new second access point at this point here off this lane, which as you'll see is predominantly single track, and members at the site visit saw that it's substantially overgrown on both sides, which will of significance later on. There's a ditch along this side, which means that the the crossing here would need to culvert that ditch. I don't know if we can stand a chance of getting on the earlier plan. If we can go to the detailed plan first. The point being, Chairman, that as initially proposed, and hopefully I'll be able to demonstrate it to you, the pipe had a limited core, limited diameter, and the Environment Agency objected to the culverting of that pipe because they were frightened that obstructions and general flows in times of flooding would dam back because of that. And if the machine will help us, I'm hoping it will just show you the diameter, because the real detail is in the next one. If it's not going to play ball, can we switch to the second one? And then we get one of them, hopefully. Now, what the applicant did in response to the objections, he went away and altered the design. And what we'll see in a moment is that the net area, this looks good, if I can sort of show you here, imagine you've got a round pipe which was found unacceptable. The applicant altered the design more like a letterbox, more like a box. And that's the good one. Whilst this is up, if members try and visualise that area there, which is the section through the ditch without the development, the revised detail, which is now recommended to approval for you, this kind of net area is more or less equal, and that's why the Environment Agency no longer hold their objection. The design of the culvert has been broadened, more like a letterbox as opposed to a pipe, so that the flows that were of concern to the Environment Agency can pass through. And on that basis, on this revised plan, the Environment Agency removed their objection. Now, members will see from the details that the Highway Authority is consulted on the merits of the application. This involves an access and various difficulties with the street. And what the Highway Authority have reported back to us is that whilst normally the ambient speed on this route could be up to 60 miles an hour, because that's the national speed limit for that type of carriageway, the conditions on this stretch of road are so poor that actually drivers will be going at a very slow rate. Now that actually works in favour of this scheme from a highway point of view. They say that the ambient speeds that will be travelled along this stretch support, because the vehicles are going to be moving so slowly, there's more room for drivers to react and manoeuvre, and therefore they raise no objection on highway grounds. There are a number of conditions that are recommended to that, such as improvements to visibility to the hedgerows, etc., to do with that. But this is, I was going to use, and I'll use it now, a surprising recommendation, because as drivers, when we look at the site, we're conscious of it, and that's the very point that the Highway Authority are making. They're saying that we're so conscious of the fact that the access is in a tight visibility, it's a narrow road, that psychologically the drivers will slow up, and therefore they are raising no objection on highway safety issues to you. So the recommendation, Chairman, as you'll see in the report, is one of approval, subject to those conditions. There is one letter on the addendum you'll see from the applicant's agent. I won't read it out because members have seen it, but I say the recommendation is approval.
Thank you. Councillor Mr Hoy, I believe you wish to speak.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm about to do the impossible, but we will see.
Pictures.
This was called in, and there was a site visit, which I believe 3 members attended, which is slightly disappointing, because I think attending the site would have helped members understand the points I'm going to raise. I think the best picture would be the number 2, actually. I think that relates to everything I'm going to say much better. I would also like to comment upon the fact that our officers earlier mentioned about educating Essex with regard to education. Perhaps we need to educate Essex with regard to highways as well. I'll draw members' attention to point 15 on page 9.1.5, the highways issues, which has already been alluded to. The site of the proposed access would be to a relatively narrow stretch of road and where the visibility is poor because of alignment and the substantial hedging on either side of the lane. As I said, apparently Essex Highways thinks that will make people go slower. Further round, and I've immediately lost the point I want to make, they suggest, and I cannot find it now, because I've turned the page. Oh, there it is, it is on the same page. That there would only be anecdotal evidence for my side of the story, which I think is dangerous still. However, I'd like to point out that Essex Highways don't even have anecdotal evidence. They have no evidence. This is just their view. Their view is that because this is a narrow road and it's people will therefore be travelling slowly. This is a residential road. It doesn't look like it. There's a large number of houses further down, and people who use this road live on this road. They are used to it, and they will be driving far faster than people who do not know the road, shall we say. This is a site to a holiday camp, caravans, on the bend. The site of the entrance is immediately on the left of this photograph, where the green is. On the right, sorry. The person coming out will be, their head will be roughly where the ditch is, and they're looking up that road round a bend, which is a few yards further to their right, where cars will be coming around that bend, and they'll be putting out into the road without having a clear sight around the bend. I think it's only 2 metres the hedges will be removed. There was talk about lopping the oak tree, I think it is. I'm not very good on trees. The big tree in the middle of the picture on the lower branches. I'm not sure what lower branches they mean, because to me it's the hedges which is in the way rather than the tree. I believe this should be refused on the grounds of highways. It's a dangerous entrance. There is no clear line of sight for drivers exiting the site. The drivers exiting the site or joining the site will not be used to the road because they would be visitors. The other people using the road would be residents who would be driving faster than people who would not know the road, which may well be Essex Highways. I've asked if Essex Highways have actually visited the site. I haven't had a confirmation that they have. So I would ask members to consider this. I know we are told we have to obey what Essex Highways tell us, but I really do think at times they haven't paid full attention to the issues on these sites. Thank you.
Okay. Do any other of our visiting members wish to speak on this item? No. Okay. Right, Councillor Mountain then, please.
Thank you, Chairman. It's a holiday park, so I just wonder, are they all static homes, or would there be an expectation that perhaps caravans or vehicles with trailers?
Static.
That it's all static, so there would be no caravans entering the site.
No, it's just be a static site.
If Essex Highways are convinced that vehicles are driving slowly around there, then surely they would have no objection to reducing the speed limit.
Councillor Mrs Mason.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. As you're probably aware, I didn't go on the site visit because I wasn't on this committee. However, when I read this report prior to this evening, I couldn't see a problem. Couldn't see a problem at all. So I actually went and visited the site, and I don't know who the members were on the site visit, but I was surprised at the severity of the bend. And I was standing roughly slightly further down, I think, where the proposed access is. And the car came round the corner towards us, and I'm not a good judge of speed, but I had to move out of the way quite quickly. And I couldn't see it, and I didn't hear it, to be fair. There's another bend on the other side. It's between two bends, but this bend that is shown here, I would say, is potentially the most dangerous. I'm concerned that we don't know if Essex County Council have visited the site. I understood the protocol was that they would explain, that they would inform us if they had, and if they've done a desktop analysis. Certainly, from my experience, looking at it on paper, yeah, not a problem. Looking at it on the ground, yes, there is a problem. In my view, it's potentially dangerous.
We've sought clarification about whether they've visited the site, and unfortunately that clarification hasn't come. It's just that we haven't had an answer, not it's one way or the other. However, just to reiterate, Essex County Council have put their formal decision on page 20, on points 21 and 22. Councillor Cutmore.
Very briefly, Chairman, I think we're in the same cleft stick as we are with other applications, in as much as if you actually took this to appeal, County Council would have no evidence and you'd lose your appeal. So whilst I accept that there may well be problems with this particular site, and I think the Councillor is quite right to clarify them, I think unfortunately we're in a position where we have to accept it. There you are.
Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Chair. I'm very familiar with this area, and anecdotally, when I was out delivering leaflets in 2016 and in 2015, I was nearly taken out by cars that came round the bend there. They come round faster than you think, and the photograph there is showing a winter or autumn. There are no leaves on them. Now, the paradox is that in summer, when all the leaves are on the trees, it's actually very dark there, so you can't see the vehicles coming out. The current entrance and exit to the site is actually in an ideal position because you can see it approaching from either direction. So it's actually very clear what's going on. And my concern here is that the vehicles that are coming out of here, if you turn left into Kingsman's Farm Road and go down to the Brandy Hill, that's probably not where most of the traffic's going to be going. They're going to be turning right. And my concern is the danger that you can't actually see vehicles approaching you coming out the shadows in the summer.
Thank you. Councillor Hockway.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wondered, is there any prospect to defer this to seek further information from Essex County Council?
I think Essex County Council have put their viewpoint, and I'm quite happy that we've got more than enough information to make a decision tonight. Councillor Mountain.
Thank you, Chairman. I was Councillor Hookway beat me to it, but I think in terms of what Councillor Cutmore said again, we're in this situation. We can't. I cannot, with these concerns that are being voiced by members, and I can't have with a clear conscience support this application, because if it's supported and there's a horrible road traffic accident or whatever, I'm not going to be the one that moved for approval. But I know what the Chairman has said. I appreciate what you've said, but there are sufficient members' concerns here that I am going to move for this to be deferred, requiring further, based on members' concerns. We are not having all the information we require from Essex County Highways. When did they visit the site? And there's lacking information. So I'm moving for this to be deferred, subject to the receipt of further information.
Can I ask before we go to that? So we're seeking whether Essex County Council visited the site or not, we are seeking the confirmation of the Essex County Council position. It is up to them. We cannot demand them to visit the site. They need to just reiterate or not their position. we will make it clear that the reason behind our request is that it is unclear whether they have visited the site or not. But our request in the deferment is to ask Essex County Council to reiterate their position or modify it as appropriate.
On grounds of safety, correct, because it's we possibly, I'm speaking out here, but believe it's inappropriate to have a turning on a 60-mile-an-hour speed limit in this location. And I'd
Councillor
like
Mason,
further
did you want to second that?
Yes, I will second that. I'd
Okay.
like to move for deferment.
So, well, I think rather than continue the discussion, if we've got a motion for deferment, I think we might as well just deal with that rather than prolonging the discussion tonight. So, on the basis that Essex County Council will be asked on the grounds of safety to reiterate their position, or not as the case may be, those members in favour of the deferment on those grounds, please indicate. Right. That item is deferred. Hopefully they can come back next month and we'll have that. Right, members, thank you very much for your perseverance tonight. Meeting closed.